China has been the world's most populous country for ages. In 1750, China's population of more than 220 million people comprised one-fourth of the total world's population. In 1950, China's population was over 523 million. In 2000, it was more than double, reaching 1.26 billion. In 2023, China's population is 1,426 million, which is almost twice that of Europe's population and more than the population of the whole of Africa. Impressive, right? Well, it seems like the days of China being the #1 country by population are over. March 2023 will mark a significant change because, according to United Nations, it's the time when India, with an estimated population of 1,428 million people, is expected to overtake China. This shift is not only symbolic, it is expected to have social and economic effects for both countries. In 1980, China, influenced by fears of overpopulation and possible economic difficulties that come with it, started to implement the controversial one-child policy. China had a population of 981 million people at that time. A couple of years after introducing the one-child policy, the Chinese government decided to allow some exceptions for specific groups of people. For example, in the mid-1980s, rural Chinese parents were officially allowed to have a second child if the first was a daughter. Some other exceptions for ethnic minorities were also introduced. In 2015, 35 years after the implementation of the one-child policy, China established a two-child limit, and in May 2021, the limit was loosened again, and it became legal to have 3 children. In July 2021, all the limits were removed, but the negative effects of this policy are felt to this day and probably will be felt for many years to come. In 2022, the average number of children a woman in China had was approximately 1.2. If China's one-child policy sounds controversial, you will be surprised to hear that India implemented a policy targeting India's population growth even before China. In 1950, India's population was 357 million people. Hoping to slow down the growth of the population and thus boost economic development, in 1952, India implemented the world's first national family planning program. India's Ministry of Health and Family Welfare was responsible for the program and encouraged people to plan the size of their families and use contraception. Seeing that the birth rate does not drop as quickly as expected, in the early 1970s, India's government implemented forced sterilization. Officially, only men with 2 children or more had to be sterilized, but it is known that many unmarried young men, especially poor men and Muslims, have been sterilized. In 1980, India's population was almost 700 million people. It has increased more than twice since then. There are currently 4 Indian states with large Muslim populations where a so-called two-child policy is in effect. In recent years, there were even multiple unsuccessful attempts to pass the so-called population control bill, which focuses on discouraging all couples from giving birth to more than 2 children. The bill suggested stopping the subsidies on various goods and facilities for couples that have more than 2 children. It also states that such couples should not be allowed to have government jobs. If we go back to China, it is estimated that by 2050, China's population will be 8% smaller than it is now. So what do these demographic shifts mean for China? One of the problems China is facing is an aging population. Due to constantly falling birth rates and increasing life expectancy, China has one of the fastest aging populations. The number of Chinese citizens over 65 is estimated to reach 330 million by 2050. That is more than double than now. The number of retired citizens will keep growing and there will be fewer and fewer people whose labor will have to support them. A shrinking workforce is likely to lead to declining GDP growth. China will have to find ways to sustain economic growth. Because of its cheap labor and the fact that many global companies have outsourced their production to China, China is known as the world's factory. The demographic changes might be a threat to this China's role. There are already labor shortages in China's factories. Overtaking China's status as the most populated country can be a huge opportunity for India. From the perspective of political influence, this could strengthen India's claim of getting a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Demographical shift in the long term could also be an opportunity for India to become the new world's factory. But before that happens, there is a list of problems that India has to solve. It is projected that by 2050, India's population will reach 1.67 billion people, which is almost a 17% decrease from now. Even though India is a relatively young country with more than half of its population under the age of 30, India, like China, is also an aging country. United Nations believe that in the following 30 years, the amount of Indians over the age of 60 will double and constitute almost 19.6% of the total population. Despite India's population growth and unimaginably high number of young people, there is a huge lack of skilled workers. Only 5% of India's workforce is recognized as formally skilled. There are also problems with India's transport infrastructure that, even though are already being addressed, are impossible to solve quickly. As China passes the crown of the most populated planet country to India, both countries have demography-related issues to solve. Even though this shift highlights many challenges both countries face, this can be an opportunity for India and not only a symbolic one. If you like this video, make sure to press the like button and subscribe to this channel because we will have more.